ready.
Okay, sir. Good. So, good morning to all of you. Uh, you all agree that science and technology is to find solutions to the problems being faced by the society. However, all technologies are not accepted by people, though it is meant for finding solutions to the problems being faced by them. And this is where I think, especially when it comes to novel technologies, there is a need to focus on arriving at the methodologies of creating awareness about amongst the people about the technology so that an informed decisions can be taken. At NIAS, we've been working on science and risk communication and with an aim of creating a platform for engaging students, researchers in the domains of science and risk communication, and the people. And so a discussion forum is being started, and this is the first one in the series. No, because of the COVID, we are doing it on the online platform. Hopefully, in the months to come, when things become all right, we will look forward to having it on a in-person meeting in person. So the first in the series, we are calling it as Let's Discuss RISCOM, and we're very fortunate to have Professor V.S. Ramamurthy delivering the lecture and participating in the discussion. Professor V.S. Ramamurthy is known to many, including the people from outside NIAS, but still I will briefly introduce him. And he's currently emeritus professor at NIAS, and he was the former director of NIAS. And he's an eminent nuclear scientist with a broad range of contributions from basic research to science administration. And was actively associated in science promotion in India when he was the secretary of DST and continued to do it even after that. He has held several important positions in India and abroad, including IAEA, and he's actively been involved in the human resource development in all aspects of nuclear research and applications. And in recognition of his services, he got several awards, and one of them is the Civilian Award of the country, Padma Bhushan, by Government of India in 2005. One of the domains he's very passionate about is science and risk communication, and he's mentoring many researchers who are working in this domain, which includes me. And we felt it's appropriate that we start this forum with Professor V.S. Ramamurthy. Sir, we will now hand over the platform to you. And how we formed is that we will have your thoughts about on this topic for maybe about half an hour or so, and then after that we have two scholars working in this domain with me at NIAS. They have some questions to ask you. Then we'll open up to the audience, and this is how we want to do it. So we welcome you and thank you for agreeing to be on this forum, Professor V.S. Ramamurthy.
Thank you, Professor Sai Baba.
Morning, sir.
Can you hear me? Good morning. Yeah. Thank you for Professor Sai Baba. Risk communication, we have always seen as a major challenge today, because on one side technology is increasing almost on a daily basis. On the other side, the technology ignorance on the part of the public at large is also increasing because of the very nature of these technologies. So in today's lecture, I intend to basically touch on some of the elementary things, effectively the starting point. Definitely this problem cannot be addressed in half an hour. Solutions cannot be listed in half an hour. But on the other hand, unless we know what is the problem, it's going to be difficult for us to find a solution. So today's lecture is going to be basically setting up the tone for science risk communication rather than addressing the problem of risk communication. Oxford English Dictionary defines this as a possibility of something bad happening at some time in the future. This is also the perception of most of us. That's a risk. I mean, we do something now, but things don't go as planned and result in loss of something that you value. That's a risk. If you don't have a loss which you value, then that's not a risk. Now, some people may think that, okay, don't do anything. It's also a safe option because there nothing bad can happen. But that's not true. The not doing anything may also result in an unexpected loss and therefore risky. So it's often said that zero risk options don't exist in life. If somebody is looking for a zero risk option, he will be disappointed. Everything what you do today carries with it some risk of different kind. Now, what the spectrum of which we can think of in the coming days? What could be the possible risk? Loss of life. This everybody knows. Everybody is afraid of. Nobody wants to die, and nobody will like anybody else to die in his close circles. So loss of life is probably one of the risks which we are all afraid of. We would like to avoid as much as possible. The second in the line is loss of health. Like you don't die, but you have a serious health problem. It could be cancer, it could be a kidney failure, it could be any one of those things. This is also a risk, and you may be responsible for that. I mean, if you get cancer because of chewing tobacco or cigarette smoking, you are responsible for it. What you do today, you are facing a risk tomorrow. Sometimes the loss could be livelihood. You lose your job, lose your business. But we have seen it in the last few months after the onslaught of COVID. So many people lost their lives. So many people lost their livelihoods by way of business. That's another thing which is there, which is a loss which you would like to consider, take into account. Loss of reputation. You do something today, but then for some odd reason it becomes a reputation issue. So that's something which again we would like to avoid as much as possible. Of course, corporate risks are there, big companies are there. They talk about thousands of crores, but then they also face a risk. I mean, we have all seen the collapse of Kingfisher Airlines, started with a lot of fanfare in 2005, collapsed in 2012. Right? This is something which you have to take into account. Yes, of course. Financial risks, people talk about possibility of insurance, right? And you can, if you lose money, you can always get the insurance cover. But there is also a life insurance, but that doesn't give the life back. It takes care of your relatives, but a fellow who has died has gone. He doesn't get any coverage because of the life insurance. But at least his family and close people will not be affected. That also has carry a risk with it, because somebody may actually take insurance and then kill this fellow to get the insurance money. So that the protecting life through an insurance is itself risky. Now, risk perceptions are highly individual. What I think as risk, you may not see as the risk. What somebody else thinks as risk, I may not see as risk. It depends on individuals, varies from individuals to individuals, and there is no standard yardstick how a risk can be assessed. The same person may view it differently, sitting in different places or sitting in different times. Today he looks at it some form, and tomorrow he may not have the same view. So risk perceptions are highly changing. There is no standard yardstick for risk perception. But I would like to classify this.
Professor Ramuti, sorry to disturb. We are still seeing the first slide. I think no, that is.
You want to see the first slide?
No. We are still seeing the first slide. You can change it to the next slide.
Why? I have changed it.
Yeah, that's the problem. Just go to the side and then maybe you can. We are still seeing the first slide, sir.
Achha, okay, let me see. I don't know how to go back to that.
Maybe you can exit the full screen and then do slide by slide. I think so. We are
going exiting the full screen is also not easy.
Yeah, got this. You wanted the fourth slide. That's the one.
I think it's like this then.
Okay, sir. Yeah, thank you.
Now, there are kinds of different perceptions of risk, which I would like to classify some of them, not all of them. The first, of course, is familiar risk. You know, standard things, what you do day to day, sometimes like violation of a traffic rule. Risk. If you violate a traffic rule, you may get hit, you may be caught by the policeman, so many things can happen, but it is so familiar, after a few days you forget it was a risk at all. I mean, you ignore the risk. Violation of traffic rule becomes a habit by in itself. So this is one class of risk which we call as a familiar risk. The second one is, of course, is important, self-satisfying risk. Tobacco chewing. Why a person choose tobacco, knowing fully well he might face a serious risk like a cancer. This is not unknown, everybody knows about it, but it gives you some satisfaction. He feels happy internally and therefore he is willingly accept that risk. Yes, I may get cancer tomorrow, but I enjoy doing it today, let me do it. So cigarette smoking comes into the same category. Adventure sports, mountaineering, somebody climbs the mountain Everest. He may not come back. It's a risky business. I will never do it, but many people do it. Rafting, water rafting, bungee jumping. Somebody climbs some 500 meters up and then gets tied to a rope and jumps out. I will not do it, but many people do it and they pay for it. They don't mind paying for it. So this is a class of risk which people willingly accept because it is satisfying to themselves. It is, yes, it is risky, but I like it. There are professional risks. The carrier in the defense services or fire services, he has a risk of dying tomorrow. There is nothing about it. You can stop it. It is a part of the profession, but then many people like it that way. They take the profession knowing fully well that there is a risk associated with that profession. These are the professional risks. Commitment to a cause. There are people, volunteers, who work in pandemic times. Like for example, the other day I was reading about an ambulance driver. He has ferried something like 200 COVID-19 corpses. Family members will not go with the parts to their burial place, but this fellow was carrying all of them. Why? It's not only for this 5,000 rupees or few thousand rupees he gets for the visit, but he feels like being part of the frontline workers. There are sometimes dire needs. You need money. Like for example, there are surrogate mothers, organ donors who do it for money. They need the money and they are willing to do it, undergo a risk as a result of this action, but they do it for a specific purpose, which is monetary considerations. The last one is which I would like to talk about is the public risk. That's a topic theme of this this series on risk communication, public risk. What is a public risk? Number of risk bearers are large. It's not limited to me or to you or somebody. Very large number of people. More important, we don't know who they are. They are anonymous. It could be anyone. Nobody can say who is facing the risk. This is not possible. And the fellow who is facing the risk may not be a beneficiary at all. He might not have benefited by that, but then he faces the risk. I will give you an example of it. We will come back to this a little later. The one standard example is cigarette smoking. Cigarette is a self-satisfying risk. I like to smoke, I smoke. But then passive smoking by the people in my room, in my office, or in the house, they are not enjoying smoking, but they face the same risk as this fellow because it can result in a cancer, right? These are well-known examples of public risk. Probably very well-known example is passive smoking. Now, each one has his own perception. Each one has his own acceptance levels. How do I communicate? You may ask, why should I communicate? Now, personal experiences play an important role in everything, including perception of risk. Take for example, as a young child, one-year-old child. How does it learn? Only by doing things by itself. And what cannot be done by itself, it starts communicating with people around, his mother, his father, his other people. And by the time you are in the school, bulk of our things come on what we can do and what we can't do is we don't have to experience it ourselves by communicate. I talk to you, you tell me what is the problem in it, and sharing of experience through communication plays an important role throughout our lives, right till the death. We always ask. So if I want to buy a train ticket, I go and ask Sai Baba, hey, where do I get it? Can I get it easily in the station or do I do it online? I don't keep on saying that, no, I must find out myself. Communication is an important part of this, and risk communication is also covered on this. Unfortunately, many things, there is you ask something, you get the information, that's the end. But risk communication also depends on the perception of that person who telling you. So he may say there is no problem. Actually, there may be a problem which is I consider is very serious. So because of the differences in risk perception by different people, risk communication becomes highly complex. It is not like the normal communication. This is a complex communication because of the perception difference. One thing which is always there, trust plays an important role in risk communication. If I don't trust you, whatever you say on risk, I will not accept. But for others, I don't care because I can always take a second opinion. But here, this is not possible because I'm seeking your view, and unless I trust you, I cannot communicate risk with you. How do you accept the risk? Well, normally, what do we all do? Cost benefit analysis. How much I have to pay and what do I get? That's a standard way of doing our decisions every day. For everything what you do in every day, cost benefit analysis is a method of doing our decision making. But when there is a risk, you have to do cost benefit risk analysis. We have to take all the three into account. And there may be a benefit, but it comes with a risk associated with it. We all make choices in our day-to-day life, taking this into account. Somehow it may not be explicitly written down, but at the back of our mind, we always say, how much I have to pay? What do I get out of it? What is the risk I face? Maybe later. This is something which is a normal process of decision making. Problem comes when the cost, benefits and risks are spread over long periods of time. I have to pay today. I will enjoy it for the next maybe 2 years. Risk comes after 2 years. How do I balance? How do I say, is it worth it or is it not worth it? Should I pay or should I not pay? More complex. If the cost, benefits and risks are not all financial, there is no common denominator. If I say cost is 100 rupees, the risk is worth 3 rupees, okay, I can compare. But not all of them financial. I mentioned about the adventure sports, bungee jumping. I have to pay 200 rupees to go and jump. Yes, cost is financial. Benefits, psychological. I feel good. I jumped and I was hanging for the next few minutes. I had a adrenaline growing up. It was definitely psychological. You get nothing in return in terms of money. Risk, there could be an accident, the rope breaks and you go and hit the ground. You are finished. Why did I take that risk? When benefits are only psychological and the cost I pay. So effectively, I pay for something which may allow me go to the marg. Why do you do that? So it's a complex decision making process. So when a person goes to a bungee jumping and pays for it, it's a very complex decision making process and risk is taking place in his mind. As I mentioned, not doing is not an issue. There are costs for indecision also. Suppose I don't take a decision, then there is no risk. No, not true. If you don't make a decision, even then there is a risk associated with not taking the decision. Zero risk option don't exist in life. There is, if somebody tells you that you don't do anything, you will not face any risk. No, not true. It does not exist. Whatever you do, whatever you don't do, there is an option. I want to give a small story. I may overshoot my time, but it is worth giving. You know, we are all from the government, and till my retirement, I was a government servant. One of the requirements in the government is when if you are more than 55, you must go for a medical checkup. Now, whether you are sick or not, it's a standard process, medical checkup. So one of my colleagues was called, good fellow, called and said, go for a medical checkup because you are above 55. He went to the best hospital in the town. They did everything. And finally said, bhai, in your ECG, there is a small kink. This could be a problem. So we would like to do a bypass surgery. So I came home and said, I had no problem, but these fellows want to do an operation on me, bypass surgery. What is this? So his wife said, hey, I have a second opinion. What's the problem? So he went to another hospital. Said, this is what they are saying. He says, yes, there is a kink there, but you don't have to have bypass surgery. I would suggest a stent. We can do it at a much lesser cost. Just put a stent, we will be okay. You will be okay. He said, I have no problem, but I will still be okay. I'm already okay. So he came back to his wife. He said, no. Let's ask our family doctor. He knows you for the last 20 years. He has been looking at our health. Let's go to the family doctor. So they went to the family doctor. Family doctor said, well, see, these hospitals have a vested interest because if they do a bypass, they make 5-6 lakhs profit. If you have a stent, you have 2-3 lakhs profit. This is not required. I will tell you some lifestyle changes and some medicines I will give you. You will be okay. His wife said, yes, that looks to be a reasonable option. But this fellow has a fear. Maybe there is a problem. What do I do? So he is not able to sleep. So then he went to somebody else, one of his friends. What is this happening? He said, no, what you say is right. The hospital in doing it, the doctor has a vested interest because you will go to him again and again for consultation, a lifestyle changes. You must find somebody who doesn't have a vested interest in your having this problem. Then you will be okay. Unbiased opinion. That. So then he said, started looking for somebody who doesn't have a bias. Ultimately, he ended up the only person who doesn't have a bias is an astrologer. Because he doesn't do operation, he doesn't give medicines. So he started going from one astrologer to another astrologer and getting different advices. One fellow says, go to this place, another fellow says, do this puja, third fellow says, do this pension, all sorts of things. In the meantime, he is tense. His mind is being eroded by this worry. So after 1 year, he died. He had no problem. All right. Now what? Indecision. He should have taken a decision. Okay, let's go for an operation. Let's go for an operation. I don't want an operation. I take the medicine. We go for that one. Going from astrology to astrology is not a solution. But that he paid a price for looking for a zero risk option. So it doesn't exist. Let me come to the main theme of today's talk. Public risk. Cannot be identified. These are anonymous, and in general may not be the person who benefit may not be the beneficiary also. If some group benefits, some other group pays for the price for it. The easiest example which comes to my mind, take this a 25 kilometer signal free corridor road linking Nepal to the airport. It is a very good road. If you in exactly 20 minutes, 25 minutes at any time of the day, I can reach the airport from here, from Nepal. I like it. I like the smooth ride. Roads are good. Reduce travel time. There is a problem. The smooth ride also invites overspeeding by reckless drivers. There are some fellows, taxi fellows, who like to enjoy driving at 120 kilometers because they like to do it. There are some fellows who want to save some 5 minutes by accelerating more. So the corridor is accident prone, no question. But the accidents are not limited only to speeding vehicles. Anybody can be involved in accident. I travel as per the rule, 60 kilometers or 60 or 70 kilometers. The fellow comes and hits me from the back and I'm dying. The victim could be anybody. So effectively, there is a risk. The risk is not limited only for those people who disobey. I could be a victim. Now, I travel there. I don't want to go to there. I travel to the Hyderabad, but then because of the airport travel, they made it signal free and they have created a problem for me. So this is a clear case of a public risk where you don't know who is the risk bearer, who is the beneficiary. We all say, yeah, government should take care of it. You know, government is seen as a custodian of public good and public risk. It is balancing costs, extra effort in putting that road. It balances public good. It balances public risk. So we expect government to take care of it. What does it mean? Maybe deploy more people, more policemen to monitor, radars to monitor, and give strict punishments on this. Nothing happens. There is always this problem is there. Now, why did they do it? They don't have to do it. The old Bellary Road was okay, good enough. But then governments are always constrained. The airport is built, they are not doing anything. Infrastructure is not being this. So the governments are constrained not because of your good or your risk, but public perception which will affect their electoral compulsions. These are not only for the road, for any policy making by the government, communication of public good and public risk has become extremely important. You have to tell the people why you are doing what you are doing. You have to tell the people what is the cost they will pay, what is the risk they will face. And if you don't do it, you have to tell them why you are not doing it. As in the case of any risk, indecision is also injurious to public good. And that was a risk in itself. You know, they tell me the road from Bangalore to Mysore is under discussion for the last 20 years. Who pays the price? Who is facing the risk of having a narrow road connecting by two important towns in Karnataka? We. And that's the cost of indecision by the government. I want to give two examples where the communication has made a difference. The first example which I liked is passive smoking. I mentioned it before. I smoke because I like smoking. I know there is a risk to me. That is a conscious decision by me. But then my 1-month-old child is also smoking because I smoke in the house. It's a passive smoking by the child. You are risking the child's health. Of course. 10, 50 years. Smoking has always been heavily promoted for commercial reasons. It is nice, particularly in public. This was the situation. And when for example, when I took my first flight abroad, international flight, when I get down, people immediately know I have come back from international flight because my shirt will be having the smoke smell all the time. Because everybody smokes. Even non-smokers used to smoke inside the cabin because that is part of the elite culture. Collateral damage of passive smoking, we all know. No, you don't have to repeat it. The public recognition that this is not good, this is not in our interest, that came maybe around 30 years before, 20, 30 years before. And a slew of steps were taken to restrict smoking in public places, including legal requirements. You cannot smoke. Right? They slowly said you will not smoke in public. Today in NIAS you cannot smoke outside your room. Right? No government offices you can smoke outside your room. It took 20, 30 years to get this regulation in place. And what led to this regulation? Massive awareness campaigns. Massive awareness campaigns that you have to do it, and the government were forced to act. Otherwise, they'll be very happy to collect the taxes from the cigarette companies, and there is no reason for to bring this legislation. They brought it because of the public awareness of what is bad, what you like. And today, I must say, passive smoking has substantially reduced. It's a good thing which has happened, and it is because of communication. Effective public communication against passive smoking. This was the one which forced the government to begin legislative steps, and today it is taking place across the world, except a few countries, of course. In contrast, there is another story, the BT brinjal story. Now, BT brinjal is a suit of transgenic brinjals. It was done using a biotechnology technique. I don't want to go into detail, but it is supposed to give resistance against specific insects, particularly the brinjal fruit and shoot borer. This used to cut into the income of the farmers and reduce the yield. So this was developed somewhere. It was approved for commercialization in India in 2009. There are so many committees, so many methodologies to do it, and it was approved for commercialization in 2009. But there was an outcry against its safety. The Indian government applied a moratorium. They said 6 months we will wait to find out what's happening, and then we will come back. 10 years later, nobody has revisited it. The moratorium still holds. No government wants to touch this. Not only that, there are new developments. There are the same technology which has been used for sarson and other things which is supposed to give a better nutritional value for that. That also will not be, because unless this is cleared, that will not be cleared. So that's also stuck. The repeated assurances by the specialists don't seem to be cutting ice with the agitators. Now, who are the agitators? Farmers who are agitating in the street corners. You ask them, what is BT cotton? I have no idea. They don't know biotechnology, what is it? They don't know who has used it, who has not used it. Some Neta told them, no, you must agitate. Today, whole country, for everybody is agitating for something. Nobody knows why. You ask them, they don't know why they are agitating, but they are agitating, right? And the BT, this technology has become a victim of this kind of public pressure on the government. It was still. I understand BT brinjal is already available in the country because it is coming through Bangladesh. Bangladesh grows in a big way, and we are getting the brinjal from Bangladesh. So all of us maybe are eating BT brinjal without knowing we are eating BT brinjal. Now, can we do something? Can you educate the farmer? How do you educate an unpad farmer on their technology? They have to believe the scientists, but then the report by the scientific academies were thrown into the dustbin. So they don't believe the scientists. They want, I don't know, they believe the Netas probably more, but the fact remains that it is stopped. It has stopped. Now, can we have a consensus in matters of public perception? No way. It's very, very unlikely. You will have 100%, everybody agrees. The 1.2 billion people will agree to such a technology intervention. I don't see it's even possible. So what do you do? It's a very confused situation. What is the challenge ahead? What do you do? That's the question. First question is, are the long-term interests of the country being compromised by such agitations? We have to ask ourselves, BT brinjal, whether it is Kudangulam, whether it is a new dam which is being built, whether it is a new infrastructure project which is coming up somewhere, if there is an agitation and it stops it, is the country's interest being compromised by this a group of people? I don't know. One would be tempted to say, after all, it's a responsibility of the government to protect the interests of the public and take appropriate decisions based on a majority people. Let them do it. I don't worry about it. I don't care. All right. Now, in a democracy, can the government afford to ignore public sentiments even of the minority? That's what we have seen now. We already seen, it's not a majority which are saying no, but a minority is adequate number to kind of affect the next election. So government has buckled down. Is it okay? I don't know. Is the public informed enough on issues like highly technical issues like BT? Certainly not. There is no question about it. The only option available to the government is to manage public perception of the risk. You have to convey to the people what is it we are trying to do, why are we doing what we are trying to do, and what are the issues which they can understand, what are the issues they should do it to the specialists. There is no other alternative but to convey this information to the public. So risk communication holds the key for any sensible governance. If you say it doesn't matter, some government will come, some minister will come, something will be done, I am happy, that's a different issue. But if you want the government to take meaningful decisions, the government should take the public interest into the account, and government should optimize the best use of whatever is available today. You have no alternative but to strengthen your risk communication. Who will do it? The responsibility lies with everyone. Holding leadership position in all segments of society. Scientists are responsible, yes, but they are not the only public. The political leaders are responsible. The administrative leaders are responsible. The religious leaders are responsible. Everybody is responsible. Nobody can shirk the responsibility of informing the public what is good for the public without defining what is the public, right? So this is the challenge for today, and this is the challenge in risk communication. Because what do I get? I know what I'm getting. What I'm not getting, what I'm not likely to get, or what the risk I will be facing 10 years from now, that's very different capacity. And communicating that is not easy, but we have no alternative but to do it. I would like to stop here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Ramamurthy. Yes, it is a responsibility for all of us, whether in order risk communication holds the key. Thank you for setting the platform. Now, two other scholars working in on this project, I think they have been wanted to interact with you. So, Siddharth, would you like to start your question?
Hello, Professor Ramamurthy. Thank you for.
Yes, you can go ahead.
Thank you for the interesting discussion. My question is, according to you, how important is the role of social media for communicating risk, and what are the ways to effectively use social media? And the second question is, in one of the NIAS Science and Society series of perception and acceptance of public risk, you mentioned that at the collective level, sociology and culture plays a very important role in defining public risk acceptance. So do you still believe the same? And if so, why?
Okay. Your first question, is the social media relevant? My answer is, that's the only thing which is available to you. Social media is the only way of reaching the entire public. But on the other hand, the media doesn't reach. Media is a media. You have to reach. So effectively, social media is a new tool available to us. Previously, we have to write in newspapers. We have to go and give a public talk, which was limited. Social media has opened up that entire thing. But social media by itself is of no value unless professionals, leaders make use of the social media to reach out to the public instance. This is my first answer. As far as the other thing is concerned, the second question which you have asked for, just 1 minute, let me recall my memory. Yeah, sociology and culture. What is the use? What is the relevance of sociology and culture? You see, public perception of anything is very strongly influenced by the sociology and culture. You cannot decouple the sociology of the community, culture of the community from an assessment or a decision which they make. Now today there is a discussion of entrepreneurship in India. You know, there are professors coming from United States and this because 20% of the new entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley are Indians. So we ask why in India they are not doing anything, right? So we try to analyze why Indians are doing differently in Silicon Valley and differently in Bangalore. Okay, what is the reason? Sociology. Sociology makes a difference because whatever with reason, one thing which I always say, a failure in United States is taken as a qualification. He is willing to take new risks. And he failed, but he can take one more risk. So it's in my CV I started a company and I failed. In India, if I fail in something, even my wife will not look at my face. You are an idiot. Who asked you to go and try it? Right? It is a cultural difference. Okay. We have to recognize this cultural difference. It exists. And you see the cultural difference in our response to the COVID. Are all countries responding in the same way as one country to another? No. Is it related to the educational level? No. It is related to the culture, right? So cultural differences will play a part. We have to recognize these cultural differences and make use of it in our communication.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nandagopan, you would like to ask your questions?
Yes, sir. Before that, can I ask you to stop sharing? Your presentation is still sharing.
You want to see that? Yes.
No, sharing. So can you stop
sharing?
it?
I have stopped it.
Oh no, it's the window is still open. I think maybe you can check your sharing window.
How do I do that? I don't know.
On top, the same place where you click for sharing.
Yeah, but it says stop sharing. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. It's gone?
Yes, sir. It's gone.
Okay, fine. Go ahead.
Okay. So, sir, for my first question, it is related to what Siddharth asked. So you mentioned sociology is very important.
Yeah.
So in your opinion, what are the major social and cultural factors which contribute to risk perception in India? And are we any different from the rest of the world in perceiving or in thinking about risk, especially the West?
Sociology and culture is all pervasive. I cannot identify sociology and culture in this group or in that group and that group. It's all pervasive. No two countries are identical. So it's not a question of India is different from the rest of the world. No, every country is different from the rest of the world. No question on that again. Okay. But what is important is how does it affect us in conveying a specific risk? This is what is important. Okay. Now somebody may say, oh, higher education levels will help you. Okay. Now go and read what are the regulations for GM food in United States and what are the regulations for GM food in Europe. Both are educated countries. Both are very closely linked. Europeans are there in US, US citizens are in Europe. Do they have the same perception of GM food? No, completely different. Why? These are the differences which we have to recognize. So I would suggest is the following. I cannot identify what is responsible. What I would like to say is recognize that cultural differences exist and ask yourself, what should I do in my cultural background to send out this message? This is what is important.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. My next question, I would like to get into a little specific into a specific industry, say the nuclear industry, since we are doing this RISCOM exercise as part of nuclear risk communication. So, in that context, how do you distance the nuclear energy industry from the shadow of past nuclear accidents? I mean, which have found lasting opinions of risk among the general public. How do you, like you spoke about public risk and familiar risk, how do you get nuclear into a familiar public risk kind of thing?
No. See, actually, I will not like to distance nuclear from the public risks of the past. Actually, it is also a message, a lesson for the public. Okay. Now look at nuclear. There were 3 accidents: 3 Mile accident, Chernobyl, and Fukushima. We know what were the reasons for these accidents, what were the response for the different countries and communities for these accidents. Okay. Now, what is important is the following. What are the alternatives? Can you have, can somebody give a nuclear technology which has no risk, zero risk? That's what I said. Zero risk options do not exist. So that's the blind chase we should not do. Now, is three accidents in the last 50 years, is it too much or too little, or what is it, and in what connection? Okay. Now, in today's world, we are looking at nuclear, not whether should we have nuclear or not. What we are looking at is, should nuclear supplement our energy mix, coal, oil, renewable energy. Okay. Now, coal, you continue to use coal the way in which you are doing now. In another 15 years, you will all die. There is no question about it. But there is a ample proof for climate change because of the coal, and we cannot continue to use coal or oil the way in which we are doing now. Okay. So now, if somebody says, what about nuclear? We can have an accident also in the next 100 years, 200 years. My answer to that is the following. You want me to choose whether my grandson will die because of suffocation in Delhi roads, or is it because of the possible accident in one of the power stations? Is that a best choice for me? That is not the choice I am asking for from the community, from the government, from everybody. Right? So do not look at nuclear in isolation. Look at it in the overall perspective. Number 1. Number 2, people talk about renewable energy choices. Okay, leave coal and oil, renewable let us do. Can renewable address the energy needs of the community in the coming 50 years? Okay, answer is question mark. More importantly, even if you want to have renewable, number 1, you already have a problem of daylight variation. You want to address this. So people talk about, I will have batteries. For the entire night, you will run it on battery, and day you run it on solar. That amount of battery storage will require how much materials? Fundamental, which have to be mined. Number 1, that much material may not exist. Number 2, if you start mining that kind of material from different places, you will ruin this world. Right? So there is a complex issue. What I would suggest is the following. Professor Dinesh Srivastava is somewhere in the screen here, and myself, we have written a book on climate change and energy options for a sustainable future. We do not take sides. We don't say do this or do that. That's better or this is better. We have listed all the issues. What is in favor of that? What is against it? And we will like people to take a decision on that. Now, we have written it not for the experts. Everybody knows. Baba knows what is good in nuclear energy. This book is not written for Baba. The book is written for students and youngsters who are going to face the problem tomorrow. Your children are going to face. You are only 25, 30. You have another 30 years to go. Your children are going to play. So we have written this book for the youngsters. Don't believe the specialists, but these are the facts. Make up your mind. Ask yourself questions. Ask the question to those people. How are you addressing this? How are you going to take care of this? Right? The days are gone when Homi Baba said nuclear is good for health. No, nobody will accept it today. Right? In the same way, if somebody says nuclear is not good for health, tell him get lost. If nuclear is not there, what are the other options to me? Talk about it. You will say, no, I don't know anything about solar, but I know nuclear is bad. Those kind of specialists, do not even waste your time on them. Ask them specific questions. Right? So do it. Yeah, I know. It's not going to be easy, but I'm not promising that it will be easy.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. I think now I will request the audience to interact with Professor Ramamurthy. Any questions? Yeah, Professor Rajaram Nagappa.
Professor Ramamurthy, I had a question. When the corporates try to take shortcuts and don't communicate the risk properly, how do you view it? Specifically, the Boeing 737 MAX, which puts a lot of risks at lives, this one, and they took shortcuts. Boeing company took a lot of shortcuts. How exactly do you view it? What would be the suggestion or solutions towards that?
It is not a failure of Boeing alone, because Boeing is interested in protecting the returns on investments of the shareholders. It is the responsibility of the government. It is the authority in United States which handed over the entire responsibility to Boeing. There is an agency in United States which is supposed to vouchsafe that the safety is okay, but they didn't do it. Right? And same thing holds in this country also. So what is important is, and the government is in the hands of the people like you and me. So we have to ensure the government is answerable for their stupid decisions.
What you say is there's a systemic, this one, the regulatory authority failed, the government failed, as you say. So again, you are saying the people really need to take action and correct the system.
Yeah, absolutely. You have only one power, the vote. You have no other power, right? Are we making use of it? In many parts of the country, you pay one biryani and 500 rupees, and I will vote for you. You will deserve only this. That has to change. The power of the vote, the public is not still realizing.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Rudro?
Yeah. Hello, sir. This is Rudrodip.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. I had a question that you mentioned the corporate risk and you took the example of the Kingfisher Airlines. Now, among the different kind of losses, this corporate risk actually under its umbrella takes loss of livelihood and loss of the reputation, loss of livelihood of the employees and loss of reputation for the companies. So in those cases, you need a complicated flow chart with the feedback loop, and those kind of things may not be only monolithic but actually polychromatic. So
Hello.
and the thing is that you mentioned that we always go for the financial calculation, cost benefit, but to give the compensation, we need this money. Maybe I may be psychologically damaged due to an activity from the government, but how to compensate my psychological damage? I can only be monetarily compensated. Other than that, maybe some motivational talks may help from senior people, but it's nothing.
And monetary is not absolute.
Yeah.
There are people who left Air India, a safe job in Air India, went to Kingfisher and lost their job in 5 years. Now, among those people who lost their jobs, there are people who feel, well, I have made enough in the last 5 years, that's adequate, doesn't matter. There are people who say, well, I lost a good job, now what do I do? Both are there. All right. Similarly, for a corporate failure, in Karnataka, one corporate failure prompted one of the leaders to go and commit suicide. He jumped into the river. There is another corporate failure who is having a holiday. He gave it to the attorney and having a holiday in London. They don't look at the same way. Right? Now, how does it affect you? You will have to decide. I cannot tell you. Have you invested in Kingfisher and lost it? I don't know.
No. I don't invest anywhere because right. I am a very timid
So,
man.
what is important is the following. Again, it is decisions by individuals who have led to all this. Risk assessment by individuals. Right? So we are not formally getting trained in risk assessment. We use emotions for risk assessment.
Yeah.
All right, that's not acceptable. That doesn't work. We have to learn how to do risk assessment, keeping the emotions out. You cannot keep it out all the time. Emotions play an important role in risk assessment, but that should not be the only criterion for assessment.
Yeah.
Yes.
Dr. Binoy.
Before that, anything had come or
No, sir. Before they send this one,
Hello?
same thing.
Yeah, Dr. Binoy.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Somebody is speaking.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have two questions. So whenever somebody from the government or from a psychology background is seen in the team which is trying to assess the risk, like happened in the case of Kodangulam, where even the media projected that scientists from NIMHANS are studying the mind of the people.
We're talking about the paid media?
I don't know, sir. So the moment the people start to see the vested interest, so as a policy maker, how you manage the vested interest perception of the people? That is my first question. Second question is, when you say that people have to decide, there is an issue, obviously controversial, as well as, there will be two kind of information coming on every project. One group will be saying that, yeah, we need this, these are the benefits. Other side, people will be saying that this is a very dangerous project to the people. Like a common man, it will be difficult to take a decision because on both sides, these are experts. So in such a situation, what they should follow? These are my two questions.
No, what the society should do. That is why I said the so-called leaders in different segments of society have a responsibility. The man on the road is not in a position to make an assessment of all these things. There are very many issues which are complicated, and he is not qualified, he is not experienced, he is not in a position to make it. And therefore, the role of the leaders become very important. But it is not leaders in one segment, leaders in all segments, because the risk can be can be across the segments. And what we have seen is, number one, scientific community and technology community play an important role, because in today's world, science and technology has an overriding penetration into the day-to-day life. In my day-to-day life, there is no way I can say science and technology is not relevant for me. This is number one. The second one, the person who is supposed to protect me against all problem, exploitation, risks, everything, is the government. Now, in the government, there are three segments. There is a judiciary, there is a bureaucracy, and there is a legislative. Right? Judiciary you don't elect. Judiciary you don't elect. Bureaucracy you don't elect. Only the judiciary or only the legislative you elect. So you have direct control only on the legislative wing of the government. In principle, bureaucracy obeys the decisions of the legislative, and the judiciary ensures you don't do hanky-panky things. Today, everybody is doing everything. You see, I still remember many of the decisions like introduction of CNG or cleaning of air. They're all judiciaries today. It has nothing to do with judiciary. Right? Just because nobody can question judiciary, everybody wants a judiciary decision. The government, the judiciary should say, sorry, this is not my domain of decision. You idiots are not doing what you are supposed to be doing, and you are passing the buck on to us. They don't do it. They're very happy to say, okay, you should not use this, you don't use this toilet paper. All sorts of decisions are coming from judiciary. And so this is a weakness in today. But the good news is we are not alone. Whether it is India or United States or UK, It is the same problem. Okay, so maybe we will learn faster than United States.
Yeah, there is a student, Harshada, you want to ask your question?
Yes, sir. Sir, as you said, risk assessment should not involve emotional use. So we being as youngsters, we are not being trained for that. And I heard it from you that risk assessment should not involve emotion. So is there any kind of training or something that is being given to the youngsters to make them aware that risk assessment has to be done by us and it should not involve emotion, because we are the ones who are supposed to take the world forward, right?
See, this is the responsibility of Sai Baba. Why Sai Baba has still a responsibility 10 years after his retirement because of this. The second thing is, unfortunately, this is not still forming part of our educational system. You made a statement, we have not been told about it, we haven't been trained. That means it is not part of the educational system. The educational system is still going on the basis of what was before. So this is also true. The governments in general are very slow. Okay, they take time. They want to be 100% sure of what they do because they cannot afford to make a mistake. So if there is a need of the 2020 risk communication should be taught to the young students, you are rest assured 2040 they will bring the syllabus for risk communication, not before that. Right? This is a weakness of the system, but you have to live with it. That is why Baba will not go out of job.
Thank you. I think, yeah, Dinesh ji, you raised your hand and afterwards, is it your question or you want to do offline discussion? Yeah, hello, Dinesh ji.
No, you see what happened is that how this flower came. The question I wanted to ask was asked by Vinay, so I just
okay. Thank you, sir.
Since you have provoked me, let me raise one question which we are discussing, but it was not covered today. And the cover is that whenever accidents happen, the role of judiciary and the governments in taking care of the people who are injured and in providing relief to them and providing compensation for them is not sufficiently discussed. In fact, we have forgotten about our people who were killed in the biggest industrial accident of the world in Bhopal. And we have been reading some things, and they are very painful to read the way it was handled. Now, sir, you should say something about that.
I agree with you. The different wings of the governments have been slipping on their responsibilities. Whether it is a government bureaucracy or whether it is a judiciary or whether it is a legislative, each one has been slipping on their responsibilities. The only person who can bring them back onto line is the public. Nobody else. There is no boss for the legislative wing other than the public. So ultimately, the responsibility lies with us. The us means everybody. It's not only with people with PhDs or only people who are in the corporate sector or whose salaries exist. No, everybody. Right? How to do it is the biggest challenge in democracy.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Ramamurthy. I think we can continue the discussion. It's very interesting. Before I want to conclude, I want to ask you this question is that you mentioned about the importance of risk communication but then how do you think people should prepare themselves, students of risk communication, students of science communication, how do they equip themselves to become a good science communicators or science and risk communicators?
The moment you say students, there is also a teacher.
Yep.
There must be teachers who are willing to talk about risk communication. He may not be a specialist in risk communication, but if I have a concern on risk communication, is there somebody to whom I can go and talk? Right? They are the people, experienced people, and they will tell you what can be done, what cannot be done. Right? So Baba comes into that category. If you have a problem in risk communication, walk into his office and ask. He may not be a specialist in risk communication, but at least he is applying his mind on that. The second thing is, why is it not in the educational system? The teaching community you should ask. Second question, okay, if it is in the educational system, where are the textbooks? Are there good quality textbooks on risk education? No. Okay. So Dinesh Srivastava will write the next textbook on risk education, risk communication. Right. So that's the only way you can do. You have no other alternative. There are no magic solutions. That's the only way you can do.
Yes, sir. So there are no questions.
Just 1 second, Sai Baba.
Yeah. Yes, Dinesh.
One small question, sir. What happened? Can you hear me?
Yes, we are able to hear. Yeah.
Because all kinds of things keep happening on the screen. Yeah. We are, as scientists, we have been trained. Apply Newton's laws of motion, you precisely know what will be the speed of a ball which if you hit it. But here we are dealing with an issue which is no longer objective. And so it is not at all clear to me that even if we have all the information, each one of us, you see, if Newton's laws of motion are applied, anybody anywhere in the world or the universe, known universe, will get the same result. But in risk communication, even if all the information is available, the feeling about the risk is going to be differing from person to person. That is my feeling. So this uncertainty or non-objectivity or subjectivity worries me. I don't feel comfortable with any subjective decisions.
Dinesh, everything is not physics and chemistry. If you go to psychology, if you go to
the functioning of the mind, psychology fellows, they are playing with the life of people.
Yeah, but the point is this: there are some subjects which are not subjected to laws of the kind which you are used to. You have to find
you know, sir, that at one time these psychologists used to put even small children who were slightly hyperactive, they used to give them electric shocks.
Yeah.
And these kids became...
Because they were using the techniques of physics into psychology, which they are not supposed to. All right. So don't treat all subjects the same. But on the other hand, you are training, formal training in physics. You don't have to limit yourself only to it. There are many people who at the age of 80 are doing exactly what they were doing at the age of 55 when they were professional physicists. That they shouldn't do. They have a capacity for thinking originally. Use it in other areas also. Please use it in the other areas. Your career is not at stake. Your awards and rewards are not at stake. But why don't you use it? That's what. So I would. My advice to Dinesh Srivastava is enough of your quark gluon plasma. Think of broader issues. Any broader issue.
Yeah, sir, I'm sure that this discussion will continue with Dinesh. Thank you, Professor Ramamurthy, for giving the perspective on risk communication. Yes, risk communication is the key, and all of us are responsible. Be people, the leaders, and the students. Everybody is responsible. Thank you for setting the momentum for this this series. Let's discuss RISC-COM. I thank you for sharing your views and guiding us in taking this activity forward. I thank all those who participated in this meeting. And if any of you want us to discuss any particular topic, please write to us, and then we will try to organize this at an appropriate time. So thank you one and all. So we will now end the meeting today.
Thank you.